The Environmental Protection Agency says exposure to lead can cause a whole host of health problems, from headaches and hearing problems in kids to hypertension and brain damage in adults. The EPA's new lead and copper rule says lead water lines or galvanized water lines need to be replaced by 2037. And in the new year, a new law will require more transparency about lead service pipes when homes are sold in Iowa. Starting January 1st, there will be a seller's disclosure statement for real estate transactions to include the presence of lead service lines. That includes the lines that connect the city's water main to the interior plumbing in a building or to the water meter. Last year, cities sent notifications to homeowners to let them know if there was, in fact, lead service lines in their area, or we should say were lead service lines in their area that were affected their homes. Now, if homeowners who do have those lead service lines elect to sell their homes, they have to include that in their disclosure statement to the buyer.
Ultimately, having the knowledge is beneficial to the buyers, and then they can determine how they want to proceed with that. And, just like if there was an issue with a roof or something else with a house, repairs could be negotiated as part of the deal.
Delv says, like anything else in the statement, it is up to the sellers to disclose the information regarding lead service pipes. If a seller does not disclose lead service lines, it could result in penalties for the seller. A new Iowa law will also impact how winnings from sports betting are taxed. Right now, the Iowa state income tax rate applied to sports betting winnings is 6.75%. Next year, the state income tax rate is going to be reduced to 3.8%. And starting in 2026, there are changes to the way taxes will be withheld from winnings. For winnings that are more than $5,000 and are at least 300 times larger than the wager, income tax will be withheld in circumstances when federal income tax is withheld from those winnings. Winnings are taxed federally at a rate of 24%.